Okay, good morning. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Alamayo Lorenzo, and many people don't say that correctly, so call my name Lorenzo. Actually, it's Lorenzo. And when I say that, are you an Italian? I'm not. I'm an internationalist. So what I'm trying to do today is trying to stimulate a dialogue on how to design, teach, and evaluate a global studies program, whether you are trying to internationalize an existing course or you want to create a new one. There are opportunities as well as challenges. And I'm thanks for Catherine. She got some of the tables assembled and printed for you. You may have copies there, and I may not spend more on that because you have a chance to read those things, and then if there are questions, you can ask at the end. But some other things I would like to emphasize is some of the experience I gained from my class. Since also my background is in international studies, and I'm teaching this at the community college level, and I was looking at, okay, where are the problems and where are the opportunities? That was what I was trying to do. Okay, it's well known that we all work and live and study in a more diverse society. That's where global awareness is needed. Our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our schools are all ethnically and racially diverse. And how do we behave ourselves? And we like to travel overseas, and there are a lot of problems that are affecting our travels, security issues, a lot of things, which is making people aware about global awareness about what's happening on this world. And we have also lingering issues, like you can say climate change, you can say starvation, drought, income inequality, gender inequality. These are going to stay, they are going to persist for long, and that makes the global awareness, again, a very relevant issue, how it should be addressed. It's not a one-time event, it's lingering, and human trafficking. I know there are a lot of women here, you will be concerned about women's rights, how women's rights are suppressed in different parts of the world, and very interesting issues. So all these problems are very complex, and we'd like to know how that they can be resolved, solved. They require a global effort. One nation, one individual, one community cannot do that. It's a global effort. Now the question is, when we are in a classroom, are we preparing citizens, individuals for that challenge? That's the most important thing. And what kind of individuals do we need in our classroom? So from the list I have here, maybe on the first page, we need individuals who are critical thinkers, outward-looking people. And I have to make sure that when I teach my global studies class, am I producing people who can do this? We need people who are competent, globally competent, and they have the knowledge and the skills to solve global problems. Maybe not as a graduate from a community college, but when they take that degree, they transition to the four-year college, or they are at workplace, how do they contribute to that? And one of my students about 2 years ago, after she finished the course with me, said, I would like to go to Africa, and I would like to service and volunteer for an NGO. She asked me, where should I go? These are very practical questions. I suggested to the place where she can do very well in Africa. That was Ghana, I think. But I haven't heard back. And this also raised a question, was that student successful in applying her knowledge? Well, we haven't heard back, and there's no network mechanism where we can do a follow-up of alumni. I know many colleges we have got study abroad programs, travel abroad programs, and unfortunately not much in my college. They started initially and it stopped, but we really like to hear from you whether these programs were successful or not. And that's the things that we need. So we like to produce people who can solve complex issues, people who can value diversity, not fear diversity. As I've said, we like it or not, we are in cultural pluralism. Our environment is filled with pluralism, and how do we behave, and how do we fear, or how do we interact with other people in that kind of environment? As students or as faculty or as citizens, how do we do that? We like individuals who can contribute to an inclusive world, that every humanity needs an inclusive world, a society with justice, and also a peaceful world. That's everyone's dream. But our education at the community level should contribute to all these goals. So in the opportunities I listed in your table, I can say there are a lot. So community college is ideal. I'm very glad you focused on that. That's where students come for lower tuition instead of going to the four-year college. And there is also an ESL support. They need those, they love these two things, as they tell me. That's why we need to target that group, and we like to promote global education starting from the community colleges. It's very, very important. If you look at the Bay Area, also we have, I think everyone in California, the faculty is diverse, so we can draw talents from different departments. We can create a team teaching, and that opportunity is there. We can do that. The problem is, does institutional framework allow us to do that? Is there a cross-departmental collaborations, cross-division collaborations? That could be a big challenge. And in my case, ESL program was initiated first or even led by ESL instructors, but it ended up in the hand of an international development expert. And the moment the people added like economics and environmental issues, they said, oh, this is not our area, we cannot do that. So it is a challenge is, what should be the core courses we have to do at global level, and how should we also design SLOs? It's a very important challenge that we have to do. So we have also research opportunities. We are very closer to, we are also very closer to, sorry, I will come to the pictures, that's why I designed. We have also a very good opportunity, which one is the button? We have also a close opportunity of being closer to the universities. Being closer to the universities, we can also do research. If you want to do research in global studies, Stanford did his, Berkeley, a lot of universities around us. And I think for people coming from northern and southern California, that's also true. But I would like to focus a little bit on the challenge part. If you are teaching economics, which is part of the global studies program, this slide is going to take me a little bit to reach there. If you are teaching economics, you will be troubled with some of the charts that are included in some of the textbooks that are supposed to be used in global studies program. So we passed all this. So what chart am I talking about? Here is a chart about classifying. These are the textbooks I have used for global studies program. The problem with these textbooks are some of them are dry. Students tell me they are not readable. They are incomplete. They are not holistic. The authors or the writers, they don't see the world from multiple perspectives. It's more Eurocentric. If you know about the Eurocentric, it is like a preeminence of European culture. They don't, when I go through, I don't see case studies from Latin America or Asia or Africa. That's missing. There are a lot of success stories from there where we can incorporate in a global education class. They also miss ancillary materials. If you are the person who would like to get a ready-made test banks and PowerPoints like that, then you are missing in this. And at one moment, I was tempted to make my own handbook. I have my own handbook, and I want to promote it to a reader, but I couldn't do that because it needed some funding and some time, and I'm still dreaming for that. I think I could say I can produce more than this, at least something very rich, if not in terms of content, it will be richer than this one. If you are teaching economics classes, you'll be troubled by this. It says sustainable development. When I read that book, I don't see any case study from Africa, Latin America, or Asia. The next book in the middle says the challenges of world development. And I have another book by the same author. It says the challenges of the developing world. So I'm confusing my students. I'm using developing world at one time and then third world another time. Am I confusing or clearing concepts? So these are the problems we are having. And then there are a lot of terms, first world, second world, third world, even fourth world. The students are asking me, oh, if we have the first and third world, what is the second world? The mathematical logic. It's very challenging things that happen there. So I have to explain them. Second world used to be socialist countries, they don't exist. So there are some concepts that were carried from the Cold War era still appearing in the textbooks that we use today. And that's very misconception of the third world is a big problem for me as a development economist or a scholar. Here is another problem. Sorry, this is line by line. This is a global map, still printed in some textbooks. The rich north and the poor south. And that line is called the branded line. And Willy Brandt used to chair the Development Commission for the World Bank 37 years ago. So why should we still print the book the report, the line that was 37 years ago, and is still making relevant? So that's where I question the authors of certain development studies textbooks. It will be troublesome, and you have to be very careful when you select the textbooks. So here's a South poor. Okay, I remember in 2011, European countries, were in financial crisis. And they're facing to China. Can you bail us? Can you rescue us? And on this map, China is in the global south. So where do we use our ITs from? India and China, outsourcing markets. As if the North doesn't depend on the South. That's the way how things are presented. Actually, things are two-way dependence. So we are missing that connection. When we say we are in an interconnected world, we are missing that picture using these charts in our classes. It's very worrisome. There are also, if we are teaching economics, we will also be worried. This is about GDP growth rate since 2009. Do you see any darker green color in the northern part? This is from the World Economic Forum. Everything is from the south. Countries in the south are registering more than 6% GDP, which is much higher than what you see in the north. So do you say the south is weak? Is always looking for help? It's not generating any GDP or wealth? It's questionable. Some terms also, they confuse me. If you are teaching history or religion or culture, you will be troubled with this map. It's still produced in some of the textbooks. It says the Arab world from Morocco to Iran. Well, we are forgetting Lebanon and Israel and Turkey, and they are not Arab nations. When this map goes down to South Sudan, it's not Arab nation. And Somalia, it's a news to me that it's an Arab nation. It's not. So you have to be very careful with the textbooks that you use in the classrooms. And then we have a problem with selection of some materials we use for like audiovisual to supplement our lectures and like that. And the producer of this DVD, this video, Slingshot Hip Hop, it expresses a frustration of young Palestinian people using hip hop to express their frustration under Israeli occupation. And she was introducing this, moving around the Bay Area campuses, including my college. And I was doubtful to use this, because if I play this in my class, am I making my pro-Israeli groups in my classroom happy? It's not. And same thing with videos that support Israel. It's called Helmet. Beneath Helmet, from high school to home front. This one praises how 5 Israeli soldiers join the army, and they make the security of Israel very strong. Will this make pro-Israeli group happy? No. That's where you have to look for a balanced material that you are sharing in class, whether we don't want to inject our bias in this kind of situation. We have to be approaching very, very carefully when we do this. And the last part where things are missing is here. I told you there are good news from the South. And everyone is now copying Grameen Bank's model. Have any one of you heard about Grameen Bank? So we have Grameen Bank model developed in Bangladesh, is now being used in San Francisco. So there is good news. And big banks, they are not lending money to risky borrowers, because they take money and then they don't pay back. They file bankruptcy. Who are they lending to? Women of minority groups. Hairdressers, African-American hairdressers, or Latina women who are running food cart operations. If you are teaching conflict resolution and peace building, we always think that military is a solution. Sending tanks will settle everything down. Well, we tried this in Afghanistan for many years. Did it work? I don't think so. In Somalia and maybe in Nigeria. So I think another way of looking at this one is, hey, how can we use indigenous population? The local chiefs, the elders, and the women. They can be better peace brokers than the UN delegates. Because the local people, they don't respect their elected leaders. They are corrupt, they are not democratic, but they respect their local chiefs, tribal leaders, and religious leaders much better. So why don't we use that? That's a correct approach. So just go from hard power to soft power. When you use a soft power, it doesn't mean always diplomacy, but also try to understand the social fabric of these traditional societies and try to build peace from within. That's very, very important. So if you have questions on this, I can answer this. Here's another one. Maybe this is my last one. I don't know how much time I have. Some people try to teach sustainable environment, taking textbooks written in Europe. They want to teach sustainable environment in the third world. But they have never visited traditional communities like this is the Konso people in southern Ethiopia. They have been doing this for more than a century, even before we had Minister of Agriculture and Extension Department in Ethiopia. And you want to teach them sustainable development for this group, they will laugh at you. They know much better than you. And that's why we need to tap indigenous resources, indigenous knowledge about sustainable development from the third world. Because we don't go and do research, then we have a problem. And here's another one. If you want to teach about resource conservation, you have a very good example from India. Mahadi Pradesh in central India is a drought-prone region. The people know how to use resources without taking too much. So they can balance between surviving in a very harsh environment without damaging the environment. That's a very good model for me. So we can go on listing so many things like that. And I've also included for you, if you have an existing program, you can check that. Check if you have yes for this evaluation list. I listed for you. If you have got more yes, then I could say your program is more successful. If not, then you need to reevaluate your program, the Global Status Program. Thank you very much for your time. And if there are any questions, I can answer them later.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out on a Saturday. I tried to get some of my colleagues to come, but didn't get any takers on that. I think it's maybe the day. So I titled this Always Be Closing, Selling Global Studies at the Course, Department, and College Level. And as a starting point, I wanted to think conceptually in order to contrast the world of business with the world of education. And I think all of us, whether we're administrators or faculty, we come to what we do as educators more so than we do business people. And with the rise of for-profit institutions, the increase in competitiveness among colleges and universities, marketing has made its way into higher education. However, it's nothing like the marketing we see in the private sector. And I wanted to show these two images just to give us a contrast between two. One is an icon and one is soon to be an icon. I think the Salesforce Tower is getting more and more press. I'm always seeing it talked about in the city. And when we contrast that with the Hoover Tower, we might think that the Salesforce Tower, as years pass, will become better known to people. So what's that old building there? Ah, there's the Salesforce Tower. And it has that link to the idea of business as more powerful than education. And my thought with this presentation was, how does sales make its way, or maybe not make its way, into institutional decisions on curriculum as we look at what we teach? And my title refers to the play Glengarry Glen Ross, which is best known for that film version with Ed Harris and Al Pacino and Alec Baldwin, but not as Donald Trump. And this speaks to some personal experience that I recently had, which I think set up some of what I want to talk about. So my high school son recently found a job over the holidays with a major department store. I won't say the store, and he's selling men's clothes. And this is a young man who wears athletic shorts every day to school. So he's not qualified in any way to sell men's clothes. But he came back one day from his workplace and said, we had this great speech with our sales manager, and he was giving, I think, what his version of this Always Be Closing speech was, which was, you got to get out there, you've got to sell, you've got to get the customer interested, this whole idea of closing the deal. And he came away from that experience, I think, oddly more mesmerized by the sales pitch training that he got than any sort of wonderful instruction that I'd given him or his teachers had given him over the years, maybe because that's such an allure in our culture, this idea of getting the customer and pulling the customer in. And it was successful. His store beat their sales goals, and I found out, as an aside, that their goal is selling credit cards because that brings people back in once they have that credit card for that branded store. I thought, I want to sell something that makes my students want to come back again and again that same way. So what's going on in this line of work and this approach to reaching the customer that I and that maybe others as academics in general don't fully bring into what we do? And this is not to disparage what we do, but I think sometimes we're more interested in the content than actually going out and selling the content to a broader audience. So is it that we see the natural importance in our specialties? And I'll speak for myself that yes, I mean, I teach English and literature has always been my passion. And it's much easier for me to say, well, this is literature, you should love this, and have students go, that 4-page story, that was a little long, or we're going to do anything shorter than that. So, so that's part of the perspective. But I thought, if you look at your field, and I know we're represented with economics, music, political science, history, and I'm leaving out many different disciplines that are here, we all have that love for our field that doesn't necessarily make us want to sell because it's an inherent passion that we have for our field. And maybe we were never even sold on that as students. So these are broad sorts of philosophical questions that frame what I want to talk about, and maybe that's something to bring up at your next faculty meeting. But I want to think about this idea of selling global studies across the college at least as much as we can do in the individual classroom. And as a context, current developments in the US and internationally have foregrounded this critical importance of global contextualization. And we've seen program cuts in a number of places that can obfuscate the practical value of global studies curriculum and programs. So as a result, I think our students can be at risk in many ways. And faculty, all of us, have this opportunity to shift that trend. And when we look at our students, so many of them have these global connections. And this is just a quick slide, which I don't know how well it shows up there, but just showing some of the ethnic backgrounds of our students, giving us a sense of how broad a group we work with every day. And they have these global links. Many of them are recent immigrants or second immigration immigrants to the US. Their families have ties to other parts of the world, yet I feel this push within so many of my students to Americanize themselves. Like, I don't want to make those global connections anymore. That's my parents' or my grandparents' world. I want to make this connection to America. And I think that can be a challenge for us to overcome as well. They don't see this importance of global studies in their current careers or what they might do after they graduate. So as we look at this blind spot that might be specific to students, I think it's something that can also get caught, can also catch us as faculty and administrators as we look at what we do every day. And as an example, so where I teach at Solano College, we had an international relations program. And it was, and that's not meant to be a flashy graphic, so don't think that's my goal here. The international relations program at Solano was just recently discontinued at one of our more recent curriculum meetings, and I want to just tell you what our international relations major was, post-mortem, I suppose. The international relations program provides an interdisciplinary, integrated approach to an understanding of modern global society and events, preparing the student for a variety of perspectives in a rapidly changing world. Students pursue global interest in language, history, culture, business, government, fine art, literature, science, and other studies. I think that just sounds like the perfect major, and we had to get rid of it. And the reasons were many: lack of student interest in the program, just not enough majors, some curriculum development issues, replacement with an interdisciplinary program in ethnic studies that's similar, but ethnic studies and global studies are not necessarily the same thing. So my goal here is not to take issue with the course deletion, but just to use this as a case to illustrate some of the challenges that we face. And this challenge that we have of educating our students globally is concerning, but certainly not insurmountable. And so I come back to this sales approach idea, is that I'm thinking, how can I do this from the ground up? If the top-down approach is not there anymore, if the institution's not supporting global studies or international relations, how can we in the classroom work from the ground up to get students interested in globally themed curriculum? So just as colleges have implemented writing across the curriculum, that's been the norm for a couple of decades now. I thought, how can we implement global studies across the curriculum to get more students in a variety of courses interested in global studies as an educational path? So Stanford is a great place, we know from being here, for global studies. But I want to think about how we can do global studies and integrate those into lower division courses. And there certainly are broader potential applications outside of English, which is where I'll concentrate. That's my field. And I want to look at global studies in the context of general education writing courses, providing others with strategies for global studies integration into a variety of classes. And I think the resulting impact has the potential to increase global studies awareness college-wide and promote program growth in global studies. So if we want to create these global citizens that we all agree are so important, then we need to think beyond global studies and international relations majors. And in a recent interview, which was from March of this year, Stanford political scientist Francis Fukuyama stated, quote, "It's not only economics that drives a people. Identity and culture matter too. The majority of people still are on a national, if not regional level. Changing that will be extremely difficult and lengthy." And he also acknowledged later in that same interview that education would be a way to push students away, and citizens in general away, from a local, a regional, or even just a national worldview. So let's think about, as two-year college faculty, the state of global studies in our community college. So we have that example I gave you of an international program, international relations program that was eliminated, but there are plenty that still exist, and I know just from talking to people this morning, there are some robust programs that exist here. I just listed a few, but I found 33 statewide, so there certainly is a strong global studies program set across the state here in our two-year colleges. There are also a number of four-year universities that have baccalaureate programs, which Stanford, of course, but Berkeley, San Diego State, San Jose State, quite a few others. So there's this opportunity for getting students interested in global studies, educating them at the two-year level, and then giving them a pathway to move on to four-year degrees with what they've learned. So the program here at Stanford's done a great deal to promote interaction and foster links among faculty, and that's had, I think, a very positive effect on a number of us, and it's great to see such interest here. So as we start to look beyond this and into ways that we can make links for students in the general education classrooms, it helps to think about the world that students inhabit. Most of my students, I'll say for my college-ready students who are in a first-year writing course, they didn't know what Brexit was, no idea. And if I talked about the French elections, they had no idea. They knew Trump, but probably didn't really know Trump. They knew a little bit about him, but not enough, I think. So we can educate our students in ways that helps them to understand the world around them, while also hitting some of the goals that they have for standards and requirements that are in our course outlines of record, which I think is important. My classes are composition, introduction to literature, critical thinking, sometimes American literature. I can't say I'm teaching an American literature course, but we're going to do all foreign texts because that's what I think is important. I've gone outside the bounds of what I should be teaching in that class. But I want to look specifically at the two I've highlighted here, which is first semester transfer composition and second semester critical thinking and argument. So as we know, we do face challenges with our incoming students and the way they assess into our classes. It's at least 60% and maybe higher of students assess into developmental reading and writing. And we've done some great things over the last couple of years with acceleration here in California and beyond. And there are ways to globalize that curriculum for students, but I'm not focusing on developmental writing here. I'm focusing on these two courses, which are college-level transfer courses in composition. So one course that I teach regularly is first-year writing, which is maybe called freshman composition, where you are college-level reading and writing, whatever the name. It's a critical course for our students because it gives them the tools, those critical thinking, those reading, those writing skills that they'll use to write about this variety of topics in every field that they encounter. And I know at my college we're pushing to get more and more students into that class first because they were finding ways around first-year composition and then saying, I'll take an advanced course in, say, psychology, where a research paper was required, and they'd say, how do I do a research paper? That wasn't a prereq for this class. We're trying to do acceleration to get students ready for those classes in a way that helps them to be successful. So in this class, there's this broad curricular mandate of reading, writing, research, organization, which makes the course good, and I would say even easy for implementing some global elements into what we cover. I look at international concepts as a means of getting to the course ends. And so as an example, I wanted to highlight an assignment that I adopted from a workshop that was here, led by Professor Gordon Chang in the history department. And this was, I recognize a few of you who were here at that workshop, and he talked about ways to use the Chinese American experience to teach history and primary texts, and part of that was teaching writing. So this was a text. It's Chinese American voices from Gold Rush to the present. And this text provides, and I'll quote from the introduction, quote, a window into the rich and diverse textures, characters, and personalities that constitute the Chinese American experience, end quote. To use this book, which is a fairly thick collection, I have a copy, but you can see the cover here. I bought a few copies rather than having all my students get it, put them in our college library, and then students access this text to do the assignment. I think they enjoyed the unique character of what they were working with because it was a series of texts that none of them had ever encountered before. Not just historical and primary texts, but texts about the Chinese experience and the Chinese American experience that were very different from things that they had read in other courses. And just a few of the essays, a few of the pieces they examined, reminiscences of an old Chinese railroad worker, detention in the wooden building, which was about Angel Island, growing up Chinese in Mississippi, and many others. They then applied the summary skills, which is a core element of that class, to these primary texts. And my first outcome goal was just that, being able to summarize effectively, create a paragraph or two on that source. What did the source say? What did you find? How did you put it in your own words? It gave them some freedom to explore what they found interesting, but they were also able to look at those core skills for the class. Then as a second part of that assignment, I asked them to do some research into current immigration in the US and some of the attitudes towards immigrants and some of the challenges that they faced. And of course, there were very current implications. We talked about the building of the wall, and that certainly gets classroom discussion going to the point where I had to steer it back to what our primary goals were. And we talked too about the Muslim ban here and the travel ban in the US, which I thought was another interesting topic for students, and it became very relevant for a number of our students who were literally worried about leaving the country because they thought, I might not be able to get back, or my family's worried about leaving because they might not be able to get back. So those were questions that came up in the context of this. And as a result, I saw them getting some real insight into the importance of immigration as a national and international issue. But that emphasis on California was particularly relevant for so many of our students because we could ask questions like, how do we examine a clandestine border crossing by someone who's going to become a farm worker versus an H-1B visa for a Google employee? I mean, how do we look at these two kinds of immigration stories side by side? And from this assignment related to summary and the like, we were able to push ourselves into some deeper discussion of the way that global issues can affect students' lives. So as a second, I'll hit this one quickly because I know we're short on time. That's fine, I can survive without this slide. In my second year writing course, students have the opportunity to choose their own topics. And so some recent interesting topics that students chose included the Russian election interference, NAFTA repeal and its effect on the US and Mexico, the Rio Olympics. One was fascinating that a student did on internet addiction treatment in camps in South Korea, because internet addiction's become such, I mean, it's a global issue, but South Korea is addressing it directly. We look specifically in this class, as a number of my colleagues have done, at Michael Pollan's book, In Defense of Food, which you would think there's not much of an international connection there. He's an American Bay Area faculty member writing about food, but food does have international implications. So what we did in this course was to look at one study where students examined the way that the choice of the Western diet, which is high salt, high fats, that diet, had an effect on people coming to the US and people around the world and their health. And I wanted just to highlight a couple of things that students had said as they debriefed on this assignment. So one of my students said, my Portuguese ancestors ate a lot of pork, red meat, and seafood. Everything was baked or broiled, not fried. The seafood was usually poached or boiled. Very clean ways of cooking, much healthier for you. My Portuguese relatives also drank a ton of wine with their meals also, which was, I guess, a revelation. Another student, my ancestors in Mexico would likely have started their day with some handmade corn tortillas with beans and perhaps a bit of meat. They used to grind the corn by hand and make them, whereas I just buy them from the store, and the ingredients were most likely all prepared by machines. I know these aren't as healthy, but they're much easier to get. And then the student went on to talk about corn farming in Mexico and how NAFTA had an effect on corn farmers. As a last one, I'll sum up this one, but it was a good one. So she said, her Filipino ancestors would have eaten a lot differently than my family. Filipino foods are influenced by many cultures, but typical meals include fish or chicken. My father grew up in the Philippines and used to tell me different stories about how he ate. She then goes to talk about what they eat now, and she says that they would eat chicken or beef. Now we eat a few of these Filipino foods at my house, but also a lot of fast food and pizza, not traditional food at all. And I think that was a real revelation for many students on how much this idea of how much what they were finding in their own lives had connections outside the classroom as they looked at food as a way to discuss global issues. So I know that not all of you teach English, but I think there's some flexibility for us as we look at our curriculum in classes that are not English, but are across the general education spectrum. My hope is that with our approaches, we can gain some additional insights into how we can globalize our curriculum. And I'm not comprehensive here at all in what I covered, but I hope we can plant some of the seeds of curricular change at that ground level, selling it to students in the GE classes as a way of getting them interested in some of the broader issues of global studies as they move across the curriculum. So thank you for your attention.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. I think we've heard a little bit about the challenges that we face with global studies, and we'd like to look at those challenges for the perspective of here's a solution, and that solution is to work really hard at creating a program of co-curricular events and activities that will create a presence for global studies. At where I teach at West Valley College, we have catched on to the phrase global citizenship so that we can capture students' interests from the get-go. Study seems to deflect their interest, but global citizenship has always been a rather interesting term for them and for all of us, even for our faculty. So Celine and I would like to talk to you about this particular possibility for growing global studies. It's been very, very productive for us at West Valley. Celine used to...
We used to work together at West Valley. That's where I started as a faculty, and then I became a dean, and I supported Dulcie and the faculty there in starting the Center for Global Education that's at West Valley College. I have moved on. I'm now at Hartnell College in the Salinas Valley with a lot of dreamers. And we are doing a lot of different efforts. It's in my nature to foster these type of efforts around global education there, but nothing organized around a global study context. It's more around inserting it into curriculum or having co-curricular type of activities around it.
I mean, that's one of the things we are not going to talk so much about it, but one of the things that Celine did was that she worked with us and another colleague, and several other colleagues. We had formed a committee called the Global Citizenship Committee. It used to be the Global Education, and then we switched it to Citizenship. And one of the things that we did in order to create presence and in order to create a draw was to dedicate a space in our campus center. Initially, it was called the Global Education Center, and now it's 10 years old. 10 years old, and it's the Global Citizenship Center. It also allows us to institutionalize the idea of global studies from more than a curricular perspective. So we'd like to talk to you about co-curricular activities from the perspective of benefit to the students.
From the perspective of faculty members' leadership.
And from the history of the college's effort, in my case more so from West Valley, although Celine has been part of that history.
From a broad global studies perspective, as well as from a college administration's perspective, which I represent.
Mm-hmm. And from the audience's perspective, meaning we hope that you can take away some ideas for how to create a robust co-curricular program at your home institutions. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about is, what is co-curricular? And I think most of us know, but just as reminders that they are usually labeled complementary, supplementary, but that we think that they're really at the core of those, if you think of a pie chart and global studies and the attempt to make a presence for it in your campus, it's about curriculum, it's about co-curriculum, it's about getting your students who are coming from other places, whether they're immigrants or not, international students, to collaborate, and then getting your students who've never been out of their little corner of the world out into the world. And that doesn't necessarily mean Spain, it could mean DC and the Holocaust Museum. And it's about training our faculty members. That's really important, so that their attitudes change, so that their curiosity increases. I remember when we first started, we were at I don't know if Celine remembers, but I will always remember this. This is 2005, and we were at a academic senate meeting, and we were talking about global citizenship, and one of the senators said, "Do you mean that you believe that there should be no geopolitical boundary between our borders? You want to eliminate our borders?" I mean, so the degree that these are our colleagues, and that colleague was asking that question, and this was not someone who was not educated or, so defining basic things like, well, what is global citizenship, and why should we be interested in this? So co-curricular activities allows us to get to that kind of conversation. And they're best if they're experiential and interactive, and they're student-centered, so that they're things that are important to students, that we recognize that it will draw students. But you don't ever want to forget your faculty, your colleagues, and the staff members, and even the administration, because you want to reach those voices. You want their support in making global studies a presence across every aspect of your community. We think it's a very powerful tool, and it's at West Valley has turned out to be a very powerful tool. So the impact is that, and it's not just an impact on students, it's an impact on the entire community and the outside of the campus community. If you establish a relationship where at least some parents, organizations are participating with you, it resonates. Your effort in these co-curricular events resonates and ripples. So I think I'm having difficulty seeing that, so I'm going to see this. To facilitate intellectual, emotional, social, ethical development, and again, primarily your students, but all of us. To engage attention, creativity, enthusiasm in a less formal, student-friendly setting. It's not the traditional classroom. It's, something happening in the campus center, something happening across in the theater, something happening out on the lawn. To stimulate curiosity, critical thinking, and to develop a sense of belonging in the college, anchoring those students. As we know, that is one way to absolutely make your rates of success and retention and persistence, to increase them. So these activities are really important. And to affirm the process of defining self-identity, goals, and your own role in society, or however you define society. You may belong to several communities, several societies, whether they be locally or all the way across the globe. I mean, we all know that our students have grandmas in other places, sometimes even parents in other places. So our presentation, at least the first part, is very much focused on what do we do when we have no money? What do we do when there isn't an institutional support? What do we do when it's just, as it used to be at West Valley, it's just a group of faculty members and staff and administrators who were passionate about global studies and wanted to do something. In fact, we created a committee. At first, it was a task force, and then it was linked to Academic Senate, and then it was not linked to Academic Senate, and now it's not linked to Academic Senate. It's just a bunch of us who really care about this, and we do things, and we didn't do it with money at all at the beginning. For example, dedicating that space was because we had relationships. We sat down, we had coffee, and we said, what can we do? And Celine said, well, we can do this. And somebody else said, well, we can do that, without the money. It has happened in those 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years, that now we have a little bit of money at West Valley for global studies, for global citizenship. We just completed one semester of spending $125,000 to send faculty and students on several study abroad opportunities. So that's really exciting. And so I think incrementally, yes, it's a long time to get to this point, but incrementally to build a necessity to show that there's a reason for having these co-curricular activities, and to show that there's an impact. So how did we do that without any money? Like I said, we talked to one another. We highlighted the expertise of one another. So we asked people to come and talk about their research. We asked people to talk about their service, volunteering opportunities. We asked people to, have a lecture on whatever they were passionate about right now. We looked at current events. I mean, remember when Arab Spring happened? And within 2 or 3 days, 4 of us had called everybody that we know, including people here at Stanford, and said, we need somebody to come and speak to us. And the room was packed. The room was packed. There were people from the community, the campus community, from outside of the community. We also had a titillating label, for this talk, and why do they hate us? Something like that. And so we tapped onto our very own expertise. And when we look at one another, we know that we have expertise. We know that we have lots of things that we want to share, whether it be curriculum or what we do in our classroom. But where do we go on our vacations? What do we do? And so all of that can be shared. That is fabulous information that can be shared with the greater community. We had film series. And yes, sometimes it was perilous because you have to make sure that you spend the $300 to make sure that you're not showing a film that's you're not supposed to be showing. And then we had conversations. And so we thought very carefully about what kind of films and how cheap they could be, but what kind of content was there that could be impactful. We created an active committee, the Global Citizenship Committee, that looked at these activities from different perspectives. So, and again, we created a visual presence. We had handouts, we had flyers, we have digital signage all over the place, making sure that students knew that this was happening, that faculty knew that this was happening. And then, of course, we wanted to train our faculty in global studies, and so we had special events just for our colleagues. How do you integrate global studies or global citizenship into our curriculum? And of course, the perennial objection is, I can't do that in math. I can't do that in science. Well, of course you can. And so we show them how. So we would have these conversations. Yes, sometimes there would be 5 people in the room, but we did it anyway. So,
It just went away.
oh,
He's going to bring it back, but. And I'm taking it from there. My premise is that if you don't feed the teachers, they eat the students. So, and I was a faculty myself, and I went into administration with the intent of really supporting the faculty in their roles. And so I'm going to start with a short story, a modification of a Jack London story that's called To Build a Fire. It's about a man that was walking across Yukon. Yukon is northern Canada, to go to visit friends at camp in way back north. And then an hour into his trip, the weather starts to change. And it's going down and it's going down. Temperatures drop to minus 75 degrees. That's really, really cold. And so after a while, he starts being frightened because he's getting cold. And he decides to stop and build a fire to warm up. And he warms up a little bit, builds his fire, warms up a little bit. It gives him courage. But he built a really small fire. There wasn't a whole lot of wood in there, and it died right away, so he didn't warm up a whole lot, just enough to have courage and keep going. So he's walking, and fast forward into the story, he gets to an area that's icy. There's icy patches, and he slides a little bit as he walks, and it's hard, it's tiring. And at one point, he puts his foot on one of the ice patch, and it gives from under him, and he falls into a creek that's right under that ice. And so now he's way cold. He's way cold. He's wet. He's in that creek. He pushes himself out of the creek, courageously frightened by now, trying to get out, and he crawls out, and now he's thinking, I really need to build a fire, a bigger fire, because I need to unfreeze, otherwise I'm gonna not make it. He sees a tree nearby, and he gathers himself up, and he goes under that tree, and he gathers some wood, and he shelters himself from the wind and builds a fire under that tree. This time, he decides to put in more wood to make sure that his fire will go for a while, and it starts warming him up, and he warms his hands, and he warms his back, and he turns around the fire. And as it keeps going, he decides to add more wood because he really wants the fire to keep going. So he goes and pulls some twigs after the trees to add to the fire, and he pulls, and he grabs a bigger one, and a load of snow comes down onto the fire. What happens? The fire dies. So now he's cold, his fire is dead, and he's starting to he's starting to lose hope. He tells himself, no time to think, I've got to build another fire, so he starts gathering more wood, piles it up, pulls his matches out, his fingers, his whole body is really frozen, and he tries to light a match. First match doesn't work. Tries a second match doesn't work, and the third match doesn't work. The lesson of the story is, what does it take to build a fire? Wood, sparks, matches, and oxygen, which was killed by the snow, right? So I'm going to talk about these three sets of tools which we can use. You can use in the classroom, you can use in working with your administrators, and your administrators hopefully are using to work with you and supporting your efforts in spreading global studies in our programs. And so when we speak about global issues and global studies, what do we mean? We all have some issues we care deeply about, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Am I right? Yeah? So, for example, peacekeeping. I'm not sure how that's going to work because I have some animation in there, but let's just try it. So peacekeeping, do we get involved? Why? Why not? These are the questions that arise every time we see conflicts emerge in different parts of the world. And how do you get involved will have a big impact. I'm looking at my colleague who's originally from Yugoslavia, and where the country was broken into different groups, and there are a lot of impacts that has. Some good, some not so good. I'm thinking about global food supplies, or the GMOs, which you talked about earlier with Mexico and with you both talked about. I'm thinking about the milk surpluses, which we're throwing away. I'm thinking about the depleting fish supplies around the world. And so it's got many facets. I'm thinking about changes in communications like fake news, like tweets and retweets, and like the digital divide, for example. And so one of the things I want to do before going forward is, since you're here, it's because you really believe in global issues. So think about a global issue that really, really drives you in your life. Why are you so involved in global studies? What's your something that really drives you. Think about that for a minute. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to pair up. We're going to share a little bit and bring this back really quickly. I'm going to ask you to pair up with a neighbor or somebody behind you in groups of 2 or 3, and to take a minute to think of questions you would ask to help others gain a greater understanding of this global issue. Just you group together with 1 or 2 or 3 people around you, turn around and get together with somebody, and pick an issue, right? Pick an issue. And we're going to do that pretty quickly because we don't have a whole lot of time. I'm going to break down the conversations, even though you look like you're having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you can come back to your seats. Okay, you guys, up.
Same listing I have.
They're having fun.
I need to hear from you. They're having fun, of course.
Everything I listed here.
I want to find out if any of you could tell us of a question that somebody brought up in your group, somebody else than you, that you thought was particularly powerful. Anybody wants to report a question that somebody asked in your group that you thought that was particularly powerful? Just go to the next slide, please. Anybody? Questions that were, yes, in the back. So the impact of politics on our global issues. Anything else? Yes. Is NAFTA good for the United States? Okay. Anybody? Yes.
How environmental destruction ultimately destabilizes the politics in a larger context.
How the environment and the changes in the environment are really having an impact on the politics in a larger context and impacts all of us. I'm going to take it from there. But basically what we just did, you guys, is add that spark to the fire. You think about something that's really, really important to you. You start talking about it with somebody else and asking critical thinking questions, which we all know we do in the classrooms, right? Or we're supposed to do in the classrooms anyway, right? And then, so that's how you start the emotional engagement into global issues, global studies, global citizenship. And it's a little bit how we started as well, because I remember I was waiting to meet with a faculty, and there was a door open across the hall from me, and I poked my head in, and I said to Vicky Calivetis at the time, I said, so how is the global citizenship group coming along? She says, we need a space. So I said, okay, let's look for a space. And we started to get them together and get the conversations going. And that's revived the whole group. And we started to meet on a regular basis, got things going. So you need that spark, that match. Okay. Then we talked about questions that arose. For example, the environment. You brought up the environment, and you brought up the impact of the environment on politics. Our colleague here was talking about the impact of the environment on our health globally. And for example, with infectious disease, I heard this week that Ebola restarted in Congo. We've been hearing about the Zika virus and issues around that, but also just we know locally as well. How does information spread? What is language? And so the next step is to add wood to the fire to keep things going. And how do you do that? How do you support adding wood in there? There's a variety of different things that can be done. For example, real-life case studies. I had a colleague who was from Zimbabwe, and at one point we had a student design I studied architecture. We had a group of students design a building for people in Zimbabwe that they were needing. We got on the internet, on Skype, and we talked with an architect from Zimbabwe. We had really interesting exchanges because of the cultural differences between, you're coming from the United States, we have the building code, you're going to Zimbabwe, and they're trying to figure out how to get enough bathrooms for people in the building. And so it was quite interesting for the students because they got a lesson in life, and I did too. One of our faculty was trying to work with our students. A lot of our students are dreamers. 70% of our students are dreamers at Hartnell College. And she wanted to do a historic film on the effect of the drought on agriculture in California with those students. And she wanted to take them to a festival in Hawaii because they'd won an award for the drought film, to go present that in Hawaii. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm supposed to just find some money for you to take your 7 students to Hawaii with yourself so you can go and present that. And we did it. I don't say no. I just sit down and brainstorm with the faculty and try to figure it out. We did GoFundMe on social media. We went and talked to the foundation. We applied for some grants. We got some funding, and we sent these students to Hawaii, one of which didn't even speak English. It was a young man who spoke Spanish when he came to college, and he was taking this theater class, and he played his play in Spanish, and then he did it in English with the English he had started to learn right there. So it was really powerful to see. And so there's different ways, really. Dulcie was talking earlier about the panel on Egypt that we put together just by drawing on people around, but that's you're adding wood into the fire right there. Okay? Another way to add wood to the fire, we had people come and have an event where they brought food from different countries, and so you would go to the cafeteria building, you would go to the student center, and people from different countries had cooked dish from their countries, and you could go and buy a $1 this and a $1 that from a variety of countries, and it helped everybody. It was really interesting. The flavors, the smells, it helped everybody at the college get involved with thinking about other countries. I saw also once, you can use imagery quite well. I saw once a talk where a gentleman was talking about how important it is to invest in preventing infectious diseases worldwide. And he opened a big case of money, and money flew out of the suitcase, and he says, this is the money you could save if you are willing to invest from the start in really preventing these diseases. Did a lot of efforts like that. You can read that yourself when you have a minute after that. But I just want to do one thing with you real quickly. Cross your arms. Cross your arms with me. Everybody around the table too. Okay, we're crossing our arms. Now try to cross your arm the other way. Right? It's hard. And so that is because we're creatures of habit. And really, to get in the habit of thinking about global citizenship, we need constant reminders, constant practices. And that's where co-curricular activities come in. You have, hopefully in your classrooms, you've been able to get enough of your colleagues to embed some global thinking in their classes. Then you need to build habits. And those outside activities, those forums with the Egyptian students, these faculty that have their own global experience and come and share their expertise, can help you build habits. And so you build teams like Dulcie and I and our colleagues, because teams are more reliable to carry through an effort, to uproot resistance, to pull weight. When she's tired, I'd pull weight, and when I'd be tired, she'd pull the weight. And we did the same with other people we work with. Building habits, because once it becomes an habit, it's not taxing anymore. It becomes natural. Building ownership where it's not my idea, it's your idea. So as an administrator, for me, it's important to listen, and they needed space. That's what they wanted. And so I tried to help them get that space. Then it became their space, and it was their idea to pursue that. And building pride. That's basically it. And all of that allows us to add the oxygen to keep the fire going. That's what it is. And that's our presentation.
Thank you to all of our presenters for giving us a lot of food for thought. And now I'd like to open the floor. We have about 20 minutes for questions and comments. There should be a microphone that is circulating so that we can hear you. And please just present yourself. Tell us who you are, where you, what institution you're from, and what you do there. I see a hand from Tony over here. Do we have a microphone?
There was one earlier.
There was one.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm from De Anza College. One question I have is, I didn't hear so much about the impact of the internet on global studies, and how does that, how is the connection of the quick, instantaneous connection between people all over the world impact the global citizenship, global studies?
I can speak to that a little bit. So most recently, we've actually had talks about that, and have tried to spread those talks from academic senate to events to each of our classes. It matters a great deal. I think that the conversation started most intently for us at West Valley after Arab Spring, because of all the discussion about the impact of social media on this development of the rebellion. And so it's very important. Right now we're addressing it from the point of view of study abroad and how we can use the internet, how we can use online teaching as a way to augment. This, I think, becomes a really important issue in places like Hartnell, where you have 70%.
Yeah, 70% Hispanic, over 800 Dreamers. Larger than I've seen at other college in terms of digital divide. Our students are coming in and they don't have access to technology. The internet barely gets to us in Salinas Valley or in the south of Salinas Valley. We're trying to really get more access for students in general. But also, for me, when I think about the impact of the internet, there's a digital divide, but there's also how we are able to reach across the world with education. And I'm thinking about MOOCs, and I know MOOCs has become not a good word, not a good approach, and I understand that. And at the same time, when MOOCs started, it prompted some discussions, such as if you have a MOOC that you want people from all over the world to follow about some mathematics or big data thing, for example, how much does the textbook you're using is going to cost to the people in these other countries? And so what do you do about that to help lower the divide, right? To help make it so that the internet is as accessible for people from around the world. And I also had the opportunity to be part of a MOOC conversation that came out of La Hague at a time where Russia had just invaded Crimea, and to hear from colleagues from around the world reacting as to what they think we should be doing as a society as a result. And so you have your perspective here, North American perspective. I'm originally from Canada. And then we also had perspective from Asia, from South America, from Africa. People were just speaking their mind about what we should do in reaction, and it was really rich. These are a variety of different ways in which the internet has impacted the way our thinking around global studies.
So one last thought about the internet and the digital divide. I have study abroad very much on my mind now, because that's our most recent effort. We've sort of gone through the hump of co-curricular activities and making them obviously important, and now we're trying to focus on another part of our pie. And for many of our students, and I know that for Harnell, this is an important issue. Our students, mobility is an issue. Mobility is a huge issue. And there's the fear that you talked about, am I going to be able to come back home? When I go home, are my parents going to be there? And so the internet and technology becomes even more important, not just because you want to see what the rest of the world is like and you cannot leave your home right now. And so how do we augment a trip anywhere with the internet and technology? And even in our own classes that we've been doing this, I mean, I've been teaching online via email since the early 90s. And so how do we use that as a tool, a powerful tool, to bring the world to our own little corner of that world?
So, thank you. My question kind of has to do with identity and how students build global identity. So I have a lot of students that, have traveled thousands and thousands of miles to be here, but their worlds seem kind of small, and the ways that they think about themselves is still within, even like ethnic senses that I could look at their experience and say, wow, there's really a globalness to it, and the way they think about themselves is still very sort of local. So I'm just curious about seeds that you're planting in students for how they can think about themselves and their own experiences differently.
I could speak to that a little bit. So one of the things that I try to do, and I didn't get a chance to talk about literature courses, is trying to bring in a range of authors who are either translated, foreign authors translated to English, or writers who have come to the U.S. and are writing in English and will be considered American authors, but giving students a broad perspective. And I think sometimes, I'm just thinking last semester we read some Junot Diaz in one of my courses, and students just seemed kind of amazed that there was this world they kind of knew. Some of my students actually had similar experiences coming from Dominican and Puerto Rico. But I understand what you're saying. There's a sense that there's there, and there's here, and there's nowhere else. And them seeing that there's a broader picture, and part of that came out of that food assignment that I shared as well, that students had the chance to look at other places around the world to consider, wow, there's this whole broad spectrum, and it's almost like they look at a globe, many of my students, and they don't see all the puzzle pieces that make up that globe. And so giving them just pictures of different places, whether it's through literature or through nonfiction, I think having the internet is a great place to just show students what's going on around the world in a broad kind of framework or point of view. So that's something that works for me.
But if I may add, I think that one key is to get our students to see that their self-identity, and sometimes for that identity may be based in nationalism, it may be based in ethnicity or race or sexual orientation or whatever they claim, and sometimes they may not claim anything at all, that even that is super complex. So, for example, I was born in Dominican Republic, and when I came, I was just short of my 11th birthday, and I knew myself as Dulce Maria. Yes, I was a child, right? But there was no reason for me to think of anything else. And then as a scholar, a grown-up, I realized that that identity was so complex. The identity that I arrived with in the United States that held on to for much of my adolescence was already hybrid, was already fraught with all sorts of issues. So asking students to look at the identity that they choose, or even the identity that they don't choose, and to critically analyze how they name themselves, how they label themselves, whatever that might be, that will bring forth the complexities and subtleties and absolutely, rich conversation that then can be brought to a broader, more global connection.
And to give you a concrete example, I've been talking with my faculty because one of the most common issue of students coming to see their deans is because a faculty has broached the topic of white privilege in the classroom. And one of the students who is more pale looking comes to me and they think that the teacher is being mean to them. And so, and so they come to me, and I've had really interesting conversations with the students as a result. Last time I had a young lady come to me and she was crying and the teacher's picking at me and he's talking about white privilege, and I was looking at her and I'm thinking, where is she, what's her ethnic background? Because I was really puzzled. She didn't look that white to me. So eventually in the conversation, listening to her and trying to calm her down and respecting how she felt, I asked her, I said, what's your ethnic background? She said, oh, I'm a quarter Latino, a quarter Native American, a quarter Caucasian, and another quarter, I don't remember what it was. So I'm looking at her, and I said, well, and your name is? And her name was Cheyenne. I said, you know, you perceive yourself as white, but I didn't think of you as white when you walked into my office. You looked to me like more of a global heritage type of person. And she started to talk about that, and then she started to realize that maybe, and we talked about what the faculty had been telling her in the classroom, and she started to realize it wasn't about her. And it's her own identity that was not necessarily that clear to her. So articulating that with our students, like Dulce was saying, where we have an heritage, and it's often a lot more complex than we give it thoughts, right? So it's about asking those critical thinking questions. But also, some of the things we've done is that we've worked with the international student clubs. I've worked with the gamers, because they often game with people from around the world. Yeah, and they have a perspective on that, which ties back to the internet impacting how we think about global issues. But the gamers are really, you know, they don't even think about the fact that they have a teammate in China and a teammate in Russia, and they have teammates from all around the world that are fighting whatever it is they're fighting, the spirits or whatever. So that's another way. So helping people dig into understanding their own identity, talking to student clubs, student groups, and getting them involved as co-curricular activities. And also, we have, at Hartnell College, started a women in leaderships group and a men in leaderships group. We were having trouble attracting men to college, as is not uncommon around the state, and so our president said, let's start a men in leadership group. We already had a women in leadership group where they're paired with somebody else at the college who is an adult. That helps them think about their identity and develop a broader sense of identity. But you're very right, with 70% of our student population being Hispanic, we're not a diverse institution. And it's easy to lose track about looking outside or bringing these outside experiences in.
But you know what? When we create those monoliths, for example, Hispanic, of course, then we're not all the same. It may be that there's a critical mass of our students or even ourselves who are from Mexico or from, but that's complex. And so to ask a student to say, well, Mexico, do you speak Spanish? I mean, you know how many people, there are over 70 languages spoken in Chiapas. Indigenous languages. Some of those people who come to the United States as immigrants don't speak Spanish at all. And so when we create those monoliths, we also have a responsibility as educators to break them down and to ask our students, oh, you think, you know, you're Mexican? What kind of Mexican? Where's that from? And, you know, what language do you speak? And what do you eat? And so that there's a recognition and affirmation, but also there is a history that develops and gets unwrapped. That wow, all Hispanics are not the same. You know, someone from Argentina is definitely not the same as someone from Guatemala, etc. So that acknowledging that small box that we think our students are in is not small at all.
We have a question over here.
Well, this is more of a comment. I'm Rebel Rickensrud Young, and I teach only online because I have a full-time day job with Head Start. But I teach English. And I've been very interested in this topic for a number of years. But one of the things I've been finding online, and I don't know if it's because of the internet and the gaming and et cetera, and also how people are, very intrinsic about how they think about themselves, but there seems to be a blurring of reality and fiction. And one of the things that I've been finding is that a lot of my students think the rest of the world and the past and history is fiction. And it's a very interesting concept that I've been trying to, deal with. I like your idea of connecting things. But I find it also a dangerous idea when reality becomes fiction.
I think I saw a few other hands up over here.
If we had an historian here who might be able to speak to that issue about the idea of history and students not understanding past as real, maybe that's the question. Yeah.
So I'm Christina Dahl, I'm from Butte College, and this was in response to Alemayo and what you were saying about the textbooks, and it kind of gave me an idea I thought I'd share. But one of the things that our college is moving more and more toward open educational resources, which is massive, right? What's available is just incredibly vast online, and I was thinking our group, or one of the things our team at our college could do to kind of work against some of the faculty inertia, or the idea that certain disciplines, don't have anything that applies to them, is to actually have a team that creates an archive from the, goes through, and because there are good things and not so good things on open educational resources, but kind of evaluates that for their college and creates this multidisciplinary archive of sources in global issues that teachers could just then use, right, or adopt. And that's usually the big issue, right? Nobody wants to take on extra work that it would require to research and get sources. So I just thought that was inspired this idea of the textbooks maybe being lacking, and trying to put together reading packets for different disciplines and suggestions.
Yeah, we have a website where we also have a blog, and we archive those sorts of things in the blog. I just wanted to respond to your concern about fiction. All of us live a certain fiction, whether we realize it or not. And for me, what I would suggest to you is when you confront that with your students is to unpack what we mean by fiction. To take a look at history, for example, and the fact that we can most definitely define it as fiction in many, many instances, and to unwrap that, to unravel it, to unpack it in a conversation with text, with different points of view, to engage that issue, and I think it could be really productive.
Well, let's say a few things about the textbook. I'm very glad you suggested a solution, but when you compile, also make sure that you add a little bit description about what that resource is. That makes selection much, much easier. And with regard to reality and fiction, that's a very important comment. Again, when we are teaching about, when we are looking about things 40, 50 years back, why are they resurfacing now? So we thought that the Cold War was over in 1989. Now it's coming back through the invasion of Russia. Russia invading Crimea, Abkhazia in Georgia, and also advancing its interest in many, many places. The problem is when we are narrating that, from what perspective are we looking at it? So if it's a very narrow approach, we always look from one side, then we create a fiction. That's the problem I see from most researchers. I see some European researchers, they go to the third world countries, they want to study poverty. You know what time they go? During harvest season. And no one will report that they are starving during harvest season. That's a bias. And they would like to also approach some studies just like in a Western style. And they ask a group of local people, say that, oh, how much do you owe? How much debt do you owe? I don't even speak about my credit card loans to my wife here. How can you expect people in the third world, which is taboo, something is taboo, It means we don't know their culture. They don't know how their social fabric works. But we try to approach it from the Western world. That's a big problem. That's where we are creating a lot of fictitious things about our results of the studies. And one thing also I share to my students in my class is I think we lack a lot of inside information. And that's why I like some anthropologists. I have a good friend, an anthropologist from Stanford, like 35 years ago. He passed away now. He used to settle in the southern part of Ethiopia with pastoralists. He was documenting everything he was looking at it every day. And finally, I talked to him, Donald, because he gave me an article he wanted to be published in a journal where I was a secretary for an editorial board. And I talked to Donald, okay, is it what you documented in 3 years, like 3, 4, 5, 10 pages? But most of my things are archived in different form. But he captured a good thing like that. We need these kind of studies which are more real. You work with the real people. You can even suggest good solutions. What's the problem with our Western approach? It reminds me about what happened in Somalia in 1991-92. When Somalia was starving, the U.S. sent, most donors sent food aid for the starving population, and all these factions, warlords with guns, they snatched the food aid, and they were selling back to the starving people. That made the donors very angry, including the United States. What did we do? We sent an army to capture the warlord. But people are hiding in their backyards. They don't want to give their own people to the foreign enemy. They don't do that. And then what happened then? So the consequence was very bad. The Black Hawk helicopter was down. 12 U.S. soldiers were dragged on the street. It was very humiliating. So what our approach to these third world countries is that it should be more on an anthropological basis. If we know how that society works or how the social fabric works, if we have an inside information, then we'll change our strategy and we will create very long-lasting solutions. That's why we try to intervene in many places without knowing the local traditions and cultures, how they function, how they operate. Then we don't come with good solutions, and we create fictions, not realities. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've come up on the end of our time for this panel. Please join me before we move on in thanking our panelists.